Solo Leveling by Chu Gong. Chapter 27 Part 2 The 10th S-Rank Hunter. Jinwoo arrived at the auction house. The building wasn't very tall, but it was somewhat wide and more reminiscent of a museum or an art gallery than a commercial building. The parking lot was huge and looked like it could accommodate events with over 100 guests, maybe even 1,000. It was obvious that the Hunter's auction house made a ton of money from commissions. As Jinwoo got out of the taxi and headed toward the doors, a formally dressed man ran out to greet him.
"Are you Hunter Jinwoo-sung?" "Yes, I am."
The man was astonished after looking up at Jinwoo's face. Then he remembered where he was and greeted Jinwoo with an upbeat voice.
"We spoke on the phone. I'm Jung-gi Kim of the appraisal team. Please follow me."
Jinwoo gave a short nod. A myriad of thoughts ran through Jung-gi's mind as he walked Jinwoo to the appraisal room. I can't believe the new S-Rank Hunter who vanished in front of all those reporters is actually walking behind me. He'd initially thought Jinwoo's call was a prank. First, the item's effect was implausible. Second, he was claiming to be the S-Rank Hunter who'd just been announced today. I almost cussed out an S-Rank Hunter. His blood had run cold when the Hunters Association confirmed Jinwoo's phone number. He was extremely relieved he'd gone by the book and hadn't been rude.
Hunter Jinwoo-sung was newly registered as an S rank, having gone up from an E rank through a reawakening. He jumped 5 ranks and has been registered as a mage class.
TVs scattered throughout the auction house were still broadcasting Jinwoo's face. Bothered by this, Jinwoo pulled his hood down farther. Despite not being the actual person featured, Jung-gi couldn't help but puff out his chest in pride. Should I ask him to take a selfie with me? He shook his head. If he wasn't at work, he would have asked for a picture or an autograph. However, it would be rude to bother a customer on important business with such a request. He had to keep it professional.
"Oh, we're here already?"
They'd arrived at the appraisal room while Jung-gi had been lost in thought. He looked somewhat disappointed.
"Right this way."
In the huge room, the appraisal team manager and the head appraiser, who'd given up their lunch hours to be here, anxiously awaited Jinwoo. The manager's eyes widened when he saw the S-Rank Hunter. It really is the man from the news, isn't it? The head appraiser struggled to tamp down his nerves. So the magic amplification sphere is really... No, he couldn't be sure. Just because the person was real didn't mean the item was, too. The head appraiser repeated this mantra to himself in an attempt to calm his nerves. Even the world's leading craftspeople pouring all they had into making the most powerful magic amplification artifact with top-grade materials would only be able to produce one with a 50% amplification. That particular project would also take years to gather all the resources, not to mention the countless number of people involved. Mage hunters across the planet would line up to buy such an artifact, so the lack of said item wasn't due to lower demand either. Even in Korea, Jongin Choi, the mage hunter also known as the Ultimate Hunter, was said to be searching for a magic amplification sphere that provided a buff of over 50%. And along came a brand new S-Rank Hunter with a magic sphere that could amplify magic by 100%? Ridiculous. The whole thing was incredible enough to warrant throwing Jinwoo out onto the street, if not for his rank. But they couldn't turn away an S-Rank Hunter. Even if this ended up being a big hoax, he'd be an important client for years to come. We have nothing to lose here. The head appraiser spoke to Jinwoo, half suspicious and half expectant.
"Could you please show me the item?"
Jung-gi and the manager also stared restlessly at Jinwoo.
"Sure."
Jinwoo called up the sphere of avarice from his inventory while pretending to take it out of his pocket.
"So this is..."
The head appraiser adjusted his glasses. It was a beautiful blood-red sphere, one that compelled people to admire it. Jungi and the manager let out quiet sighs of appreciation. The head appraiser tilted his head while fidgeting with his glasses.
This isn't made from an essence or a mana stone, is it? That's right.
The head appraiser nodded. I knew it. He'd been working in this profession for 7 years now. He'd inspected many artifacts in his day, but this was his first time seeing a red sphere. Spheres were typically a clear blue in color, and they turned blacker as the quality went up. But a red one? The head appraiser was still unsure as he took the sphere. As he held it in his hands, though. What's this? A chill ran up his spine as he felt a mysterious force radiating from the sphere. It can't be. He was astonished as he inspected the item. The head appraiser was a B-rank mage. He knew intuitively exactly what kind of item it was. His entire body broke out into a cold sweat. Oh my God! The power emanating from the sphere unnerved him, and his eyes shot up to see Jinwoo calmly watching him. If only he were a low-rank hunter. He was overcome by a feeling he had never felt before. People had brought in countless items in the past, but this was the first time he'd ever wanted to knock out the client and rob him. But this customer was an S rank. Jinwoo stared silently at the head appraiser, who barely suppressed his desire under Jinwoo's gaze. Rob an S rank? Jinwoo was so powerful, the head appraiser could barely stand to entertain the idea, let alone try it. Jinwoo cocked his head and studied the appraiser. What's wrong with him? Was he feeling ill, perhaps? The appraiser wiped the sweat from his forehead before speaking to the manager.
Please turn on the camera. Oh, yes, of course.
Turning on the camera was a sign that what the appraiser held in his hand was the real deal. Both the manager and Jungi couldn't wait to see the results. Rolling. The manager turned the camera toward the appraiser, who stood in front of a circular mana meter. He placed the sphere on the meter. Beep. A number came up. The appraiser held the sphere in his hand and measured it again. The number doubled instantly. Beep. Jungi's face paled as he read the number.
Incredible.
The manager quickly leaned in to check the result. 100%? This magic sphere actually amplifies magic power by 100%? On average, the auction house received a 5% commission per artifact handled. If an artifact was worth 100 billion won, they would earn a tidy 5 billion. However, despite his many years of experience, the manager couldn't even begin to estimate how much the red magic sphere was worth. We're gonna be rich. Rich, I say. Had they been alone, he would have screamed for joy and hugged his employees. What would their cut be if this deal went through? He found his excitement made it difficult to breathe. Jungi's reaction wasn't much different. He ecstatically pumped his fist. Yes! If everything went well, his promotion was in the bag.
I'm going to test the sphere now.
The appraiser could barely get the words out in a shaky voice. The two men from the appraisal team took a step back. Jinwoo did the same. The camera kept rolling. Video evidence was much more effective than numbers on a piece of paper to convince potential buyers. The appraiser looked right at the camera.
Let's begin.
A flurry of snow about the size of a truck tire swirled around the appraiser's right hand.
I will now touch the magic sphere while continuing to use magic.
As soon as his left hand made contact with the sphere of avarice, hoo! The dancing snowflakes turned into a blizzard that shook the entire room.
Whoa!
Had the alarmed appraiser not ceased his magic when he did, the whole room would have been encased in ice.
Please turn off the camera.
Right. The team manager ran to turn off the camera, nodding as he went. The appraisal process for the item was complete. Phew. Jinwoo had been anxious when the snowstorm exploded from the appraiser's hand, but he could relax now. Jinwoo wasn't the only one either. Everyone exhaled deeply to calm their nerves. For a moment, the room fell silent. Jinwoo broke the silence.
So how much is the sphere worth?
Would he be able to afford the artifacts he needed? While he was excited about buying new items, more than anything, he was genuinely curious about what he could get for the sphere. The appraiser looked incredulously at the sphere of avarice.
How? How could I put a price on such an item?
His eyes turned to Jinwoo. Gulp. He swallowed nervously. Where had Jinwoo found an artifact like this? This had nothing to do with the appraisal, but he couldn't help himself.
Where did you get this?
Jinwoo turned to Jungi instead of the appraiser.
Do I need to answer that for this deal to go through?
Jungi shrugged and awkwardly avoided Jinwoo's eyes. The appraiser shook his head.
No, you don't. I was just taken aback. But everyone will be curious when they find out this kind of magic sphere exists.
Naturally, the other two men looked like they were dying to know as well. Well, I guess it doesn't matter, does it? There was no reason not to answer. It wasn't something he'd acquired unfairly, or an item other people could get their hands on even if he told the truth. Jinwoo slowly opened his mouth. The others waited with bated breath to hear what he had to say. Jinwoo smiled as he said,
I picked it up in a dungeon.
President Beck strode into his office while calling to his secretary.
I'd like to be alone, please. No visitors.
He also went so far as to lock the door before turning on his computer and starting a search for information using the clearance level he held as an S-rank hunter and a guild master. Is it even possible? He couldn't stop thinking about Jinwoo. A hunter who could upgrade his abilities didn't sound plausible. Yet, what other explanation was there to explain the discrepancy he'd noticed in Jinwoo's power? President Beck's fingers moved quickly. He pulled up information from the website for the world's top-ranked hunters, but it proved to be a waste of time. Nothing. There had never been a hunter who could increase their abilities on their own. Hunters could increase their power only through paranormal phenomena such as an awakening or a reawakening. That was why some people considered hunters to be those chosen by the heavens. Numerous browser windows were opened and closed. Countless words moved endlessly across the screen. 3 hours later, tired from all his research, President Beck leaned back in his chair. Am I being too paranoid? Maybe he was. Perhaps the shock at how strong Jinwoo was had addled his brain. What was he doing at this crucial moment? He should have been texting Jinwoo instead of wasting time like this. What if that sly President Choi had presented Jinwoo with a contract already? Yunho laughed in spite of himself and began closing all the browser windows one by one until only one remained. Wait. Just for fun, he typed Hunter Upgrade Ability into a search engine. Nothing came up, of course. Not that he really expected anything. He just happened to still be in research mode. I just realized, I haven't eaten lunch today. President Beck rubbed his stomach and licked his lips as he realized how hungry he was. He was about to close the search engine when something caught his eye. There was a post on the 5th page of results that linked to a website. He would have ignored it if the link didn't lead to the Hunter-exclusive forums. Yunho moved the cursor over. Title: Something strange happened. Contents: I started seeing my stats on a floating screen like in a video game, and I can even upgrade them. Has anyone else experienced this? It was an anonymous post, but for some reason, Yunho felt his breathing quicken as he read. If anyone could see me now, they'd think I was crazy. Still, he had nothing to lose by looking into it. He picked up the phone.
Yes, Mr. President.
Manager Sangin from the second administration team answered the phone.
There is something I'd like you to look into, Managerin.
Yunho wanted to know what Jin Woo had been up to the day that anonymous post had gone up.
Understood. I'll look into it.
With that, Sangin hung up the phone. He was an extremely capable employee. He'd get an answer for President Beck using any means necessary, no matter how long it took. The answer came much sooner than expected. Already, President Beck answered his ringing phone.
There were official records, so it didn't take long. Really?
President Beck was very pleased. Now that he thought about it, he'd heard the second administration team had already collected as much information about Hunter Jin Woo Sung as they could under Manager An's orders. Hence the quick reply.
Yes. On that day, Hunter Sung was. Oh, looks like it was around that time. There was that double dungeon incident from several months ago. No. Right. Hunter Sung was a survivor of that double dungeon affair. I believe he was hospitalized and comatose during his stay. Oh, I see.
President Beck was disappointed. A person in a coma couldn't post on the internet. Increasing abilities. Guess that's not possible. He couldn't even laugh. He just felt tired. He thought about going home and taking a nap.
Huh? Wait. He was unconscious for a while.
Sangin sounded like he was invested in Jinwoo's story.
And then Hunter Sung woke up on the day you mentioned earlier.
Hearing this, President Beck shot up straight. He woke up on that day.
Oh, to be exact, it says he came to the day before.
Although Sangin quickly corrected himself, a difference of one day wasn't significant in Yunho's opinion. The important thing was whether it had been possible for Jin Woo to have written that post.
I see. That's enough for now. Good work.
President Beck hung up the phone and opened a report he had saved in his files. It was the report about Jin Woo from the second administration team's investigation. Click, click. He was most interested in Jin Woo's current activities. Until relatively recently, Jin Woo hadn't been particularly special. He had lived as a typical E-rank hunter who'd gotten more injuries than money. But the double dungeon incident. President Beck had also been at the scene on that day. The association had asked the nearest large guild, the White Tiger Guild, for their help. President Beck had gladly gone with his elite strike squad. Whew! Whew! He had seen an unconscious man being carted away by an ambulance. I didn't know that was Jin Woo. What exactly had happened in that dungeon? Whatever had gone down in there, Jin Woo had completely changed after that day. The man who used to quietly take on jobs from the association joined a freelance strike squad and cleared multiple C-rank dungeons in a single day. Something had changed inside him for sure. Beck was fully convinced. It wasn't an ordinary reawakening. Manager had proposed a theory that Eugene Construction had gotten Jin Woo reevaluated when he had reawakened. No, that's not possible. If so, there was no way to explain how Jin Woo's power had increased even after the reawakening finished. What if a hunter who can increase his power actually exists? Moreover, what if that growth occurred so quickly that he'd gone from an E rank to an S rank in several months? A moan spilled out from Yunho's mouth. He got chills just thinking about it. Of course, there was no evidence that whoever had written that post and Jin Woo were one and the same. But imagine how much stronger Jin Woo could become if he actually could upgrade his abilities, like the post suggested. How foolish I was. President Beck now understood why Jin Woo wasn't interested in joining any guild. If I were him, would Yunho have wanted to join someone else's guild if he could grow his power exponentially? He shook his head. I would rather make my own guild. It didn't matter whether the current number 1 or 2 guilds wanted Jin Woo, when whichever he went with would end up being the best. It looks like President Choi and I were dreaming in vain. He couldn't stop laughing at the thought of Zhang going to great pains to locate Jin Woo even now. But if my theory is true, this is no laughing matter. Jin Woo would be the one to rock the world of Korean hunters. He'd be the center of international attention. It was time to rethink the way he was approaching Jin Woo. But first, I have to meet with him and get some confirmation. Yunho nodded. The more he thought about it, the more he was certain his priority should be to speak to Jin Woo. But how should I ask him to meet with me? Yunho ran his hand through his hair. He had a migraine thinking about how best to get the attention of a man who'd left him hanging so many times before. The appraiser was astonished.
Did you say you picked it up from a dungeon?
Jin Woo nodded. Technically, he'd picked it up after defeating Vulcan in the Demon's Castle dungeon. You can pick up that kind of thing in a dungeon? It's true that no craftsman can make something like this. Neither the appraiser who asked the question nor the 2 other auction house employees who'd heard the answer looked like they believed it. However, there was nothing to do but trust their client. Either way, where Jin Woo got this red magic sphere wasn't important. What's important is what Hunter Sung plans to do with it. The manager stepped forward.
Well, this is the real deal.
He gazed at the sphere in Jin Woo's hand.
Would you like us to auction it? We'll do our level best to get the top price.
What should he do? Jin Woo had one question before he could decide what to do with the sphere of avarice.
Can I buy any flame-resistant artifacts here?
The team manager and Jung-gi looked at each other, then awkwardly back at Jin Woo. Jin Woo was puzzled.
Did I say something wrong? No, not at all. Then are they difficult to get? Actually,
the manager smiled.
Just the opposite. That type of gear is extremely easy to acquire. Then why couldn't I find anything online? Weapons or protective gear with applied attributes are quite expensive, so they're not normally sold online. But they're still easy to acquire, since fire magic is the most common type of attack magic.
Now that he thought about it, most of the mage hunters Jin Woo had come across thus far had used light or fire. He'd heard that S-rank hunter Zhangyan's specialty was fire magic. Even Jin Woo's shadow mages used it, including Fang, who could breathe fire. It was clear this type of magic was extremely common. I'm glad fire-resistant things are easy to get. He'd flinched when they mentioned that fireproof artifacts were expensive, but since his mother's cure depended on this, he was willing to pay whatever the price if that meant he could get his hands on them faster. If it came down to it, he could sell the sphere of avarice.
Could you look into that for me? Of course. I'll get right on that.
The manager turned to leave, but then stopped to talk to his employee.
Jung-gi, why don't you give Hunter Sung a tour instead of making him wait here? With pleasure.
Jung-gi led the way.
Please follow me.
Jung-gi and Jin Woo went into the VIP-only exhibition room, filled with the auction house's most expensive items that hadn't been bought yet or were due to be put up for auction soon. Weapons, protective gear, rune stones, and more were displayed in transparent glass cases. Jin Woo stopped in front of a display with a sword inside. Jung-gi approached him.
Do you see anything you like? No, that's not it.
Jin Woo knocked on the glass case.
Is this thing glass enough to protect it? I can't see any other security measures.
Jung-gi assured him.
It may be thin, but it's magically enhanced tempered glass crafted by the best glassmakers. It can withstand the full-force punch of an A-rank brawler with no issue. An A-rank brawler, really?
Jung-gi grinned at Jin Woo's doubtful expression.
If you don't believe me, would you care to give it a go? If the box breaks, We'll give you the item inside for free.
Was this tempered glass really that strong? I can sense its magic power, but... With his curiosity piqued, Jin-Woo focused energy in his right arm. Ugh. The muscles in his shoulder and arm bulged, and the air around him seemed to settle.
Hold on.
Jung-gi hastily stopped Jin-Woo.
That was just an example. I didn't mean for you to actually smash it. Oh, I see. If it broke, elite hunters from the Hunters Guild would rush over here. We have a security contract with them.
It had been hard to tell whether Jung-gi had been joking or not. Jin-Woo powered down. When the energy around Jin-Woo subsided, Jung-gi sighed in relief. Isn't he supposed to be a mage hunter? How was a mage hunter's energy so imposing? Jung-gi hadn't actually been kidding when he told Jin-Woo to strike the glass. Though Jin-Woo was technically an S rank, he was also a mage hunter, so Jung-gi had thought it would be fine. However, Jung-gi had gotten an ominous feeling when Jin-Woo focused his energy. Luckily, Jin-Woo had agreed to back down, which is good, because Hunter Sung could have gotten hurt if something had gone wrong. Jung-gi convinced himself of that as he showed Jin-Woo some more artifacts. Jin-Woo glanced around the room.
Could I take a closer look at any of these? Preferably daggers.
Not really being the type to rely on weapons, Jin-Woo hadn't paid much attention to them until now, but seeing these weapons on display had piqued his interest. Jung-gi's face lit up. This was why the auction house gave hunters the tour. Hunters were sellers, but they were also valuable customers.
Of course.
He used the walkie-talkie around his neck to call for the person in charge of weaponry. The employee appeared in a flash, as if worried Jin-Woo might change his mind in the meantime.
Is this the gentleman?
He indicated Jin-Woo with his gaze, and Jung-gi nodded.
Yes, nice to meet you. I'm in charge of weaponry. Please come with me.
He led Jin-Woo out of the VIP exhibition room. Jung-gi let out a sigh once they were gone. Hunter Sung has a certain knack for surprising people. Jung-gi wandered aimlessly around the room to calm his nerves and found himself in front of the sword in which Jin-Woo had shown an interest. They'd been standing pretty close to the display, so Jung-gi was checking the glass for any fingerprints to clean off when he noticed something. There at the top of the case.
What?
In one corner was a tiny, hard-to-see crack.
When did this happen?
He took out his handkerchief and rubbed at it, but it wouldn't go away. It was definitely a crack and not some dirt.
Oh boy!
Jung-gi frowned. Had Hunter Sung spotted this, it might have cost them the trust of a potentially big client. Good thing the crack was in a corner and hard to see. TSK, TSK. Jung-gi clicked his tongue and called the maintenance team before leaving the VIP exhibition room. Jin-Woo picked up the dagger he was being shown. To be honest, it was awful. Night Killer has a B-rank acquisition difficulty, but it's better than this. Its attack power wasn't even half that of Night Killer. He returned the sword with a dissatisfied look on his face.
How much is this? It's 30 million won.
Jin-Woo was startled. That piece of junk cost how much?
Could you repeat that? 30 million won, Hunter Sung. Hold on.
Jin-Woo turned around and pretended to look for something inside his jacket as he produced Night Killer in his hand.
How much would this be worth?
The employee's eyes bulged.
Is this yours, Hunter Sung? Wow, the intricate work of a master craftsman is apparent in it.
No, this was just an item from the system shop. The employee hesitated a little bit, then smiled.
It's hard to give you an exact appraisal, since I'm not a professional, but this looks like it's worth at least 100 million won.
Jin-Woo was stunned. I bought this from the shop for around 3 million gold. It had cost 2.8 million gold to be exact. After seeing the expression on Jinwoo's face, the employee scratched the back of his neck in embarrassment.
Was it something I said? I'm not an expert at appraisal, so I may have misspoken. No, it's nothing.
Jinwoo was flabbergasted at how ridiculously expensive everything was. Then again, the first weapon Jinwoo had owned had been Kim Sang-shik's steel sword with its 10 attack power, which he'd heard was worth 3 million won. And there was Jinho's armor, which had apparently cost over 100 million won, though he hadn't gotten much use out of it. He supposed it shouldn't be surprising that high-level items from the shop could be sold at very high prices. I just hadn't been paying attention. After all, he hadn't been too interested in making money while leveling up. Wait, he had tons of gold saved in his inventory. What if he bought items with gold and sold them at the auction house at a premium? The gears in his mind started to turn. Then I wouldn't necessarily need to sell the Sphere of Avarice, would I? As soon as he thought this, who? Was he imagining things? Jinwoo thought he heard the shadow mages cheering from the shadow beneath his feet.